The scorching sun of Tombstone, Arizona, beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets as Marshal Jake "Loner" Morrison guided his weathered horse through the bustling main thoroughfare. At 43, Jake had seen enough of life's cruelties to prefer the company of his horse, Thunder, over most humans. His graying beard and steel-blue eyes told stories of countless battles fought and won, but also of losses that had carved deep lines into his weathered face. "Hi, how are you? Sorry to interrupt your story, but what I'm going to ask you is really quick, and it will really help the channel to grow and create new stories. Just click below the video image to subscribe. You'll be doing an act of kindness and encouragement to those who are just starting out. Thank you very much. And continue with your story now." "Easy there, Thunder," Jake murmured, patting his stallion's neck as they approached the Silver Dollar Saloon. The year was 1886, and Tombstone was still recovering from the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral 5 years prior. Jake had arrived in town just 3 months ago, taking the marshal's badge after the previous lawman had been gunned down by cattle rustlers. As Jake dismounted, a commotion near the alley caught his attention. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the town's school teacher and one of the few people Jake respected, was arguing with Silas Blackwood, the town's most ruthless businessman. "That boy is nothing but trouble, Mrs. Hartwell," Blackwood snarled, his black suit immaculate despite the desert heat. "He's been stealing from my store, and I want him run out of town." "He's just a child, Mr. Blackwood," Eleanor replied firmly, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. "A hungry child who needs help, not persecution." Jake's curiosity piqued as he approached. "What seems to be the problem here?" Blackwood turned, his cold gray eyes narrowing. "Marshal Morrison, there's a street rat that's been causing trouble. I demand you arrest him." "Where is this boy?" Jake asked, his hand instinctively resting on his gun belt. Eleanor pointed toward the narrow alley between the general store and the barber shop. "He's been hiding back there for days. I've tried to approach him, but he runs whenever anyone gets close." Jake nodded and walked toward the alley, his boots echoing against the wooden sidewalk. As he peered into the shadows, he spotted a small figure huddled behind a stack of wooden crates. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old, his clothes torn and dirty, his dark hair matted with dust. "Hey there, son," Jake called softly, crouching down to appear less threatening. "I'm Marshal Morrison. Nobody's going to hurt you." The boy's green eyes, wide with fear and intelligence, darted between Jake and the alley's exit. He was thin, too thin, and Jake could see the desperation etched in his young features. "I ain't done nothing wrong, mister," the boy whispered, his voice hoarse from thirst. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy. Tommy Sullivan," the boy replied hesitantly. Jake noticed something odd about the boy's accent. It wasn't quite right for these parts. There was something refined about it, despite his current circumstances. "Well, Tommy Sullivan, when's the last time you had a proper meal?" Tommy's stomach answered with a loud growl, and Jake couldn't help but smile slightly. "Come on out of there. Let's get you something to eat." "You ain't gonna lock me up?" "Not unless you give me a reason to," Jake replied, extending his hand. "But stealing isn't the answer to being hungry. There are better ways." Reluctantly, Tommy emerged from his hiding spot. Jake was shocked by how small and frail the boy appeared in the daylight. His clothes, though dirty, were of good quality, too good for a common street orphan. As they walked back toward the main street, Blackwood intercepted them. "Marshal, I insist you arrest that boy. He's stolen food from my store 3 times this week." Jake studied Blackwood's face, noting the man's unusual intensity about such a minor matter. "Mr. Blackwood, the boy was hungry. I'll make sure he pays you back for what he took." "That's not the point," Blackwood snapped. "We can't have vagrants thinking they can just take what they want." "The matter is settled," Jake said firmly, his marshal's authority clear in his voice. "The boy is under my protection now." Blackwood's eyes flashed with anger, but he stepped aside. As Jake and Tommy walked away, Jake noticed the businessman watching them with an expression that seemed far more concerned than angry. At the Silver Dollar Saloon, Jake ordered Tommy a plate of beef stew and cornbread. The boy ate ravenously as if he hadn't seen food in days. "Tommy," Jake said gently, Where are your folks? The boy's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. Dead, sir. Both of them. I'm sorry to hear that. How did you end up in Tombstone? Tommy's eyes grew distant. I don't rightly remember. I was traveling with some people, but something happened. There was shooting and screaming, and when I woke up, I was alone. Jake frowned. The boy's story didn't add up. His clothes, his manner of speaking, even his table manners suggested he came from a well-to-do family. Yet here he was, alone and desperate, in one of the roughest towns in the Arizona territory. Do you remember where you came from? What your father did for work? Tommy shook his head quickly, too quickly. No, sir. I don't remember much of anything before waking up in the desert. As the evening wore on, Jake found himself drawn to the boy's quiet intelligence and resilience. When it came time to leave, he made a decision that surprised even himself. Tommy, how would you like to stay with me for a while? I've got a small cabin on the edge of town. It's not much, but it's better than sleeping in alleys. The boy's eyes filled with tears he quickly tried to hide. You'd do that for me, mister? It's Marshall Morrison, and yes, I would. But I have rules. No stealing, no lying, and you help with chores. Deal? Tommy nodded eagerly, and for the first time since Jake had found him, the boy smiled. As they walked toward Jake's cabin under the star-filled desert sky, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the telegraph office. Silas Blackwood stood motionless, his face grim as he observed the marshal and the boy disappearing into the darkness. Once they were out of sight, Blackwood hurried into the telegraph office. His message was brief but urgent. Package located. Send instructions immediately. The response came within an hour. Retrieve at all costs. No witnesses. Blackwood crumpled the telegram and tossed it into the fireplace. Whatever secret Tommy Sullivan carried, it was worth enough to kill for. And tomorrow, he would begin the process of getting the boy back, one way or another. Meanwhile, in his modest cabin, Jake watched as Tommy fell asleep on the small cot he'd prepared. The boy clutched a small silver locket that Jake hadn't noticed before, the only possession he seemed to have from his previous life. As Jake settled into his own bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that taking in this boy was going to change everything. He just didn't know how much. 3 weeks had passed since Tommy Sullivan had come to live with Marshal Jake Morrison, and the boy had proven to be both a blessing and a mystery. Each morning, Tommy would help Jake with his chores around the cabin, feeding Thunder, collecting eggs from the chickens, and maintaining their small garden. The boy was quick to learn and eager to please, but Jake noticed he often seemed lost in thought, staring off toward the distant mountains with a troubled expression. On this particular morning, as Jake prepared for his daily rounds through Tombstone, he noticed Tommy clutching that silver locket again, the same one he'd been holding the night Jake brought him home. Tommy, Jake said gently, adjusting his gun belt, you've been holding on to that locket every day since you got here. What's inside it? The boy's fingers tightened around the small piece of jewelry. I don't know, Marshal Morrison. It won't open. Jake knelt down beside the boy, his weathered hands gentle as he examined the locket. It was indeed stuck, but he could see intricate engravings on its surface, a family coat of arms that looked expensive and important. Would you like me to try opening it? Jake asked. Tommy hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir. Maybe it'll help me remember something about my family. Using his pocket knife carefully, Jake managed to pry open the stubborn locket. Inside, they found a small photograph of a distinguished-looking man in a military uniform and a beautiful woman in an elegant dress. On the opposite side was an inscription, "To our beloved son, Thomas Edward Whitmore III, with all our love, mother and father. 1876. Jake's blood ran cold. Whitmore. He knew that name. Colonel Edward Whitmore had been a decorated Union officer during the Civil War and later became a prominent businessman in California. More importantly, Jake remembered reading in the newspapers about the Whitmore family's tragic disappearance during a stagecoach journey 6 months ago. They had been traveling from San Francisco to visit relatives in Texas when their coach was attacked by bandits. The parents' bodies were found, but their 10-year-old son had vanished without a trace. Tommy, Jake said slowly, Your real name is Thomas Whitmore, isn't it? The boy's eyes filled with tears as memories seemed to flood back. Yes, sir. I remember now. My father was Colonel Whitmore. We were traveling to see my aunt in Austin when the bad men came. They killed my parents and took me with them. Jake's mind raced. If Tommy was indeed Thomas Whitmore III, then he was the heir to one of California's largest fortunes. The Whitmore estate included gold mines, cattle ranches, and shipping companies worth millions of dollars. Tommy, why didn't you tell me who you were? I was scared, the boy whispered. The men who took me, they said if I ever told anyone my real name, they'd come back and kill me. They kept me for months, moving me from place to place. I finally escaped when we stopped in a town near here, but I've been too frightened to tell anyone the truth. Jake pulled the boy into a protective embrace. You're safe now, son. I promise you that. But even as he spoke the words, Jake's instincts told him they were far from safe. If Tommy was the missing Whitmore heir, there would be people looking for him, and not all of them would have good intentions. That afternoon, as Jake made his rounds through town, he noticed several strangers who hadn't been there the day before. 3 men in expensive suits sat at a corner table in the Silver Dollar Saloon, speaking in hushed tones. Another man, wearing a long duster coat despite the heat, lingered near the telegraph office. Most concerning of all was the way Silas Blackwood kept glancing toward Jake's cabin on the outskirts of town. Jake's suspicions were confirmed when he overheard a conversation between Blackwood and one of the suited strangers behind the general store. The boy is definitely the one you're looking for, Blackwood was saying. But the marshal has taken him in. Getting to him won't be easy. We don't care about easy, the stranger replied in a cold voice. We care about results. The Whitmore fortune is worth $20 million. That boy is the only thing standing between us and that money. What about his aunt in Texas? Surely she has a claim to the inheritance. She had an unfortunate accident last month, the stranger said with chilling indifference. A terrible fire at her ranch. No survivors. Jake's blood boiled as he realized the full scope of the conspiracy. These men had murdered Tommy's aunt and were now planning to eliminate the boy to claim his inheritance. But how could they legally claim the money without being family? His question was answered when he heard Blackwood's next words. When do you want me to bring him to you, Mr. Garrett? Tonight. We have forged documents showing that I'm the boy's uncle and legal guardian. Once we have him, we'll take him somewhere remote and, well, let's just say there will be another tragic accident. Jake had heard enough. He slipped away quietly and hurried back to his cabin, his mind racing with plans to protect Tommy. But when he arrived, his worst fears were realized. The cabin was empty, and there were signs of a struggle. On his kitchen table, he found a note written in Blackwood's handwriting. If you want to see the boy alive, come to the old mine shaft at Devil's Canyon at midnight. Come alone, or the boy dies. Jake checked his weapons and saddled Thunder. As the sun set over Tombstone, painting the sky blood red, he knew he was riding into a trap. But he also knew he would do whatever it took to save the boy who had become like a son to him in just 3 short weeks. What Jake didn't know was that Tommy had managed to escape his captors and was hiding in the rocks near Devil's Canyon, watching as armed men positioned themselves around the mine entrance. The boy had overheard their plans and knew that Marshal Morrison was walking into an ambush. As midnight approached, both the grizzled lawman and the brave young boy prepared for a confrontation that would determine not just their survival, but their future together. The silver locket, now safely hidden in Tommy's pocket, seemed to burn against his chest, a reminder of the family he had lost and the new family he had found in the most unlikely of places. The stage was set for a deadly showdown in the unforgiving Arizona desert, where loyalty would be tested, courage would be demanded, and the true meaning of family would be revealed. The moon hung like a pale witness over Devil's Canyon as Marshal Jake Morrison approached the abandoned mine shaft, his hand steady on his Colt .45. Thunder's hooves echoed softly against the rocky ground, the only sound in the oppressive silence of the desert night. Jake had been in countless dangerous situations during his years as a lawman, but never had the stakes felt so personal. Hidden among the jagged rocks 50 yards from the mine entrance, Young Tommy Whitmore watched with growing dread as armed men took their positions. He counted at least 6 gunmen, all carrying rifles and positioned to create a deadly crossfire. The boy's heart pounded as he realized the full extent of the trap awaiting his protector. "Right on time, Marshal," came Silas Blackwood's voice from the shadows near the mine entrance. The businessman stepped into the moonlight, a smug smile playing across his thin lips. "I was beginning to think you didn't care about the boy after all." Jake dismounted slowly, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of Tommy. "Where is he, Blackwood?" "Safe, for now," Blackwood replied. "But that depends entirely on your cooperation." From behind, Blackwood emerged a tall, gaunt man in an expensive suit, the same stranger Jake had overheard earlier. "Marshal Morrison, I'm Clayton Garrett, Tommy's uncle. I've come to collect my nephew and take him home where he belongs." "Funny," Jake said, his voice deadly calm, "because I happen to know that Tommy's only living relative died in a fire last month. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" Garrett's smile faltered for just a moment. "I'm afraid you've been misinformed, Marshal. I have all the proper legal documents proving my guardianship." "Documents can be forged," Jake replied, "just like your concern for that boy's welfare." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, when suddenly, a small voice called out from the rocks above. "Marshal Morrison, it's a trap! There are men with rifles all around you!" Tommy's warning shattered the tense standoff. Immediately, gunfire erupted from multiple positions as Garrett's men opened fire on Jake's position. The marshal dove behind a large boulder, drawing his weapon as bullets whined off the rocks around him. "Kill them both!" Garrett shouted over the gunfire. "We can't leave any witnesses!" Jake returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. 2 of the gunmen cried out and fell, but the others continued their relentless assault. From his position in the rocks, Tommy watched in horror as the man who had become his father figure fought for his life against overwhelming odds. The boy knew he had to do something. Remembering the lessons Jake had taught him about courage and doing what's right, Tommy began working his way through the rocks toward the mine entrance, where he had spotted several sticks of dynamite left behind by the old miners. Meanwhile, Jake was running low on ammunition. He had managed to take down 3 of the 6 gunmen, but Garrett, Blackwood, and 2 others were still firing at his position. The marshal's situation was becoming desperate when he heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. "Jake!" came a familiar voice. Eleanor Hartwell, the schoolteacher, rode into the canyon leading a group of townspeople, all armed and ready for a fight. "We heard the shooting!" The arrival of reinforcements changed the dynamics of the battle immediately. Caught between Jake's position and the new arrivals, Garrett's remaining men found themselves outgunned and surrounded. "Surrender now, and you might live to see a trial," Jake called out. But Garrett wasn't finished. In a desperate move, he grabbed Blackwood's gun and pointed it toward the rocks where Tommy was hiding. "If I can't have the boy, then nobody can." The shot rang out across the canyon, followed immediately by a massive explosion that lit up the night sky. Tommy had reached the dynamite and, seeing Garrett take aim at his hiding spot, had lit the fuse and thrown it toward the mine entrance. The blast brought down a section of the canyon wall, trapping Garrett and Blackwood in a pile of rubble. When the dust settled, Jake rushed to where he had last seen Tommy. His heart stopped when he found the boy lying motionless among the rocks, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder where Garrett's bullet had found its mark. "Tommy, stay with me, son." Jake cradled the boy in his arms, his weathered hands gentle despite their trembling. Tommy's eyes fluttered open, and he managed a weak smile. "Did we get them, Marshal Morrison?" "We got them, son. You did good. Real good." Eleanor knelt beside them, her medical training as a teacher having taught her basic first aid. "The bullet went clean through his shoulder. He'll be fine with proper care." As the townspeople secured the surviving criminals and began digging Garrett and Blackwood out of the rubble, Jake held Tommy close, finally understanding what it meant to have a family again. "Marshal Morrison," Tommy whispered, "I want you to know, even if those bad men had succeeded, even if they had taken me away, I would never have forgotten that you saved me. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that, son?" "A father. Jake's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. "And you gave me something I never thought I'd have again, a son." The next morning, as the sun rose over Tombstone, the full scope of the conspiracy was revealed. Clayton Garrett had been a business partner of Colonel Whitmore, who had orchestrated the stagecoach attack to eliminate the family and claim their fortune. Silas Blackwood had been his inside man in Tombstone, watching for any sign of the missing heir. But their plan had one fatal flaw. They had underestimated the bond between a lonely cowboy and a lost child, and the power of a community that stood together against injustice. As Tommy recovered from his wound, legal documents were drawn up making Jake Morrison his official guardian. The Whitmore fortune would remain in trust until Tommy came of age, but more importantly, the boy had found something worth more than all the gold in California, a real family. The silver locket now hung around Tommy's neck openly, no longer a secret to be hidden, but a proud reminder of where he came from and how far he had traveled to find his place in the world. But their story was far from over. Unknown to them, one of Garrett's associates had escaped the canyon that night and was already planning his revenge. The final chapter of their adventure was yet to be written, and it would test their newfound family bond in ways they could never imagine. 6 months had passed since the deadly confrontation at Devil's Canyon, and life in Tombstone had settled into a peaceful rhythm for Marshal Jake Morrison and his adopted son, Tommy Whitmore. The boy's shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a small scar as a reminder of that harrowing night. More importantly, the legal proceedings had been finalized, making Jake Tommy's official guardian and ensuring the boy's inheritance would be protected until he reached adulthood. On this crisp morning in early spring of 1887, Jake stood on the porch of their newly expanded cabin, watching Tommy practice his reading with Eleanor Hartwell, who had become not just the boy's teacher, but a cherished friend to their small family. The sight filled Jake's heart with a contentment he had never known possible. "Marshal Morrison," Tommy called out, looking up from his book. "Mrs. Hartwell says I'm reading at the level of boys 2 years older than me." "That's because you're smart as a whip, son," Jake replied with pride. "Your parents would be proud of how hard you've been working." The mention of Tommy's biological parents no longer brought the crushing sadness it once had. Instead, the boy had learned to honor their memory while embracing the new life he had built with Jake. The silver locket remained his most treasured possession, but it no longer represented loss. It represented the bridge between his past and his future. Eleanor gathered her teaching materials and prepared to leave. "Jake, I wanted to remind you about the town meeting tonight. The mayor wants to discuss the new school building, and as one of Tombstone's most respected citizens, your opinion carries weight." Jake nodded, still amazed at how much his life had changed. Once a solitary drifter who avoided human connection, he was now deeply embedded in the community, serving not just as marshal, but as a voice of reason and justice that people looked up to. As Eleanor departed, Tommy approached his adoptive father with a serious expression. "Jake, can I ask you something?" "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" "Do you ever regret taking me in? I mean, your life was simpler before I came along." Jake knelt down to meet the boy's eyes, his weathered hands resting gently on Tommy's shoulders. "Tommy, let me tell you something. Before you came into my life, I was just existing, not really living. I had convinced myself that being alone was safer, that caring about people only led to heartbreak. But you taught me something important, that the risk of loving someone is always worth taking, because the alternative is a life without meaning." Tommy's eyes brightened. "So you don't regret it?" "Not for a single second," Jake said firmly. "You saved me just as much as I saved you." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Jake's hand instinctively moved to his gun as he saw 3 riders approaching their cabin. But as they drew closer, he recognized the lead rider and relaxed. "Judge Harrison," Jake called out, stepping forward to greet the distinguished older man who had overseen Tommy's custody proceedings. "What brings you all the way out here from Phoenix?" Judge Harrison dismounted, his expression serious but not unkind. "Marshal Morrison, I have some news that I thought you and young Tommy should hear in person." Jake felt a familiar knot of worry form in his stomach. "What kind of news?" "The kind that will change your lives forever," the judge replied. "May we sit down?" They gathered on the cabin's porch, Tommy sitting close to Jake, sensing the gravity of the moment. Judge Harrison opened his leather satchel and withdrew several official-looking documents. "Tommy," the judge began, "we've been conducting a thorough investigation into your family's estate and the circumstances surrounding your parents' death. What we've discovered is quite remarkable." The boy leaned forward, his green eyes wide with curiosity and apprehension. "It turns out that your father, Colonel Whitmore, had been investigating a conspiracy involving several prominent businessmen who were illegally seizing land from Mexican families and Native American tribes. Clayton Garrett wasn't just after your inheritance. He was trying to silence your father's investigation permanently." Jake frowned. "What does this mean for Tommy?" Judge Harrison smiled for the first time since his arrival. "It means that the evidence your father gathered, which we found hidden in a safety deposit box in San Francisco, has led to the arrest and conviction of 12 men involved in the conspiracy. The stolen lands are being returned to their rightful owners, and the territorial government has awarded Tommy a substantial reward for his father's service to justice." Tommy's eyes widened. "How substantial?" "Substantial enough that you'll never have to worry about money again," the judge replied. "But more importantly, the territorial governor has decided to honor your father's memory by establishing the Colonel Edward Whitmore Foundation for Orphaned Children, with you as its eventual director when you come of age." Jake felt a surge of pride for the boy's father, a man he had never met but had come to respect through his son's stories. "That's quite an honor, Tommy. But there's more," Judge Harrison continued. "The governor has also offered Marshal Morrison a position as the territorial marshal, overseeing law enforcement across Arizona. It would mean a substantial increase in salary and prestige." Jake looked at Tommy, who was practically bouncing with excitement. "What do you think, son? Ready for a bigger adventure?" "Only if we stay together," Tommy said firmly. "I don't care about money or prestige. I just want to keep being your son." Jake's heart swelled with emotion. "That's a promise I can definitely keep." As Judge Harrison prepared to leave, he handed Jake one final document. "This is something special," he said with a knowing smile. "Tommy's adoption papers have been expedited and approved. Legally, he's now Thomas Morrison, your son in every way that matters." That evening, as the sun set over the Arizona desert, Jake and Tommy sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast sky above. The silver locket gleamed in the moonlight as Tommy held it, no longer a symbol of loss, but a bridge between the family he had loved and lost and the family he had found and chosen. "Jake," Tommy said softly, "do you think my parents would approve of you?" Jake considered the question carefully. "I think they would be grateful that their son found someone who loves him as much as they did. And I think they would be proud of the brave, kind, intelligent young man you've become." Tommy smiled and leaned against his adoptive father's shoulder. "I love you, Dad." The word hit Jake like a thunderbolt of pure joy. In all his 43 years, no one had ever called him Dad, and he had never imagined how powerful that simple word could be. "I love you too, son. More than you'll ever know." As they sat together under the starlit sky, both Jake and Tommy knew that their journey was far from over. There would be new challenges ahead, new adventures to face, and new opportunities to make a difference in the world. But they would face them together, as a family forged not by blood but by choice, courage, and unconditional love. The lonely cowboy had found his purpose, and the lost child had found his home. In the harsh but beautiful landscape of the American West, they had discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in gold mines or inherited fortunes, but in the simple act of opening your heart to someone who needs it most. Their story had begun with a chance encounter in a dusty alley, but it would continue for the rest of their lives, a testament to the transformative power of love, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the truth that family is not defined by blood, but by the bonds we choose to forge and the promises we choose to keep. "Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.